Welcome back to Birds with Words. I'm Sean Fitzgerald, the author of Sinners Pass and A Fold to Extinction. Today we have a lovely guest author with us, Glen Weatherhead. He himself is also an author, and he's joining us today to talk about AI in the creative space. Glen, can you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience?
For sure. Thanks for having me. Like you said, I'm working on a number of things. So my name is Glenn. I write to a website called the Creative Writing Wizard, where I'm looking to help authors in their journey through a number of means. So you may have heard of the Indie Release Radar. That's one of the things that I've launched end of last year. And then there's a number of projects that I've been working on with the core goal of trying to find ways to help indie authors specifically to find readers, to help feel seen, to be encouraged on their journey, and to have the resources to do that. Yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Thanks, Glenn. And of course, I'll have all the links for Glenn at the bottom of the video. So today we're talking about AI, and specifically AI in the creative writing space, which is quickly becoming an issue for anybody who's not completely aware of it. So you and I probably have a unique perspective on it, since it's directly impacting us. For anybody who's listening, what we're talking about is obviously artificial intelligence. And for anybody who really wants to split hairs, Glenn and I aren't computer scientists, so we're not going to get into the difference between, is it truly AI or is it just machine learning? We're just going to go with the commonly accepted term for artificial intelligence. So Glenn, I have my first question, and feel free to go off on a tangent on this as far as you want. Let's just start at the large side before we get to the creative writing portion of it. Do you think AI overall is just bad for everybody?
That's a good question. I would say I think that AI, at least in the way that we're, using that phrase, has a lot of potential, has a lot of positive potential. But like any tool, it also has an equally, devastating potential. If used incorrectly, if, developed incorrectly, there's a lot of things that could come out of it in a negative way. So I think there is a portion of that question, which is how are we using that tool? There's also another side of the question, which is how are the tools being made, which is another huge gray area of how are these models being trained, the companies and how they're prioritizing certain things over other things. But yeah, to the big question, I think that AI has a potential to do a lot of good. But I think how we use it, how we develop the tools, that's kind of where the differentiation comes into play.
Yeah, absolutely. I had to start with that question for you because I didn't want to give my opinion and potentially have people think that I might have misled you or drawn you into my own opinion, because I'm kind of on the same side on that. I look at technology, in particular AI, that AI, just like Pandora's box, it's out, it's been opened, it's there. Now we have to figure out how we're going to handle it. There's a wrong way, I think, with AI that we can go with, and there's a right way, but there's no stopping AI. And I say that because a lot of my writer friends, in particular on Twitter, more so than any other platform, are very anti-AI, and I completely understand. And we're going to get into why so many writers and editors, proofreaders are very anti-AI. But it comes down to the technology exists. And if we don't do something, we don't as a society make a decision about what we want to do with AI, somebody else is going to use it and you're going to be left behind. And there are instances of AI that I think are phenomenal. Going outside our field, in the medical field, cancer detection rates have been skyrocketing up with AI, which I think is phenomenal. The sooner we can kick cancer in the nuts, the better. And then on the other side, I think a lot of people get lost in what AI is, and it's a brand new tool. And correct me if you disagree with this, but AI has really been in our lives already for about a decade at some level. So word processing tools, including Microsoft Word itself, has a level of AI involved in it. Your search algorithms now have AI involved in it. Amazon, your recommendations have some level of AI built into it. So we've been using AI for quite a while. It's just not as prevalent, I think, as it's becoming. So I had to set the entire conversation up that way to then bring you in. When it comes to the creative process, is there a absolute finality of saying, hey, as creatives, we should not be using AI at all? Or is there a dividing line between different types of AI?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good question. I think I'll caveat everything that I say from this point onward as this is my opinion. Um, there's a lot of discussion that I think needs to happen. I think this is a good place to have those kinds of discussions. I think that, as a community, we need to be open to talking about these things. Like you say, there's a lot of writers that are full out, anti anything that has AI in it. But the reality is, like you say, algorithms use AI. Word processing uses AI to a degree. Maybe that's like kind of a mislabeling of what it does, but functionally, it does what we think AI does, where it's doing highly optimized functions behind the scenes that we don't have to do. So I think there is a part of it where we need to accept that there is a portion of the future that is going to have these technologies. And like you say, we've had them in place. I think one of the first ones that I can think of was actually Netflix in the recent decades, where they developed algorithms to bring up movies and TV suggestions based on your watch patterns. People don't necessarily think of that as AI necessarily, but that is a form of algorithm that's trying to understand your behavior and then present you with information. So yeah, I think there's certainly some areas where I don't personally think that we should use AI. And again, like I say, everything I say is my opinion. But I think that maintaining the core creative spirit should be within the person making the content. And so a lot of these tools, like if you want to go into image generation, for example, they are taking things that have already been made and kind of mashing it together in such a way to present you something. Um, it's such a gray area, and I know I'm going to upset people by saying stuff on this concept, but I think that the creation aspect should still maintain within the person making something, and that we will use these tools to help us to make something that's based on our own creative spirit, our own creative mindset. The danger I see is, for example, there's a tool that you can type in, create me a book on this subject, and I want this kind of cover, and you hit go, and it will write, 100,000 word book. It'll design you a cover. It'll publish it onto Amazon KDP, all within like a few minutes. I don't think that you created that book necessarily. Maybe you generated it. That's another term that's floating around. I think that's where we enter the dangerous territory of we're just taking these machines to pump out something that resembles a book, but it doesn't have that human aspect of it. It doesn't have that, the human creativity part of it, which is why I've been so adamant of like, I started an indie artist showcase, and part of that aspect was I wanted to highlight artists who aren't using AI. And when I say artists not using AI, I'm talking about generating images. Because even in the art space, if you are creating something and, let's say, for example, Procreate, if you're drawing a line and it helps you stabilize that, is that AI? How far does a tool help you versus how much does a tool make something for you? Yeah, and I think that's kind of where I see this distinction personally.
Yeah, and you opened up a lot of topics there with everything you said. 'Cause, Photoshop absolutely is known now for, if you use the most updated version, is using AI to help you make those changes. Uh, so you mentioned a few things with that company. Was it Spine, which is what you and I originally started this conversation on Twitter about? Was that the company you were referencing?
I think it was a different one, but they're also another good example. I think it was them that talked about they wanted to quote unquote disrupt the book industry, which I think people, how do I say, people got really upset about, the clickbait titles. If you dig into what they're talking about, from what it sounds like, they're a glorified vanity press that streamlines some of the steps. There are certain creative jobs it sounds like they're replacing. Like, I think that they are trying to replace editors primarily. But there is still the author creating the book. You're still submitting it, still has to be approved. There is still a part of that process that I think people assume that, oh, they're going to generate books, which I'm still not a fan of what they're doing. I don't think that's a good way to go about it. But there is a part of it which I think is, maybe misplaced in how they're going about it. But the concept of, we do want to make it easier to do some of these things because being an author is hard. But I think how they're going about it, I don't know if I necessarily agree with it. But the example that I was giving was a specific, like a GitHub code set that you could download and then, run it locally. So slightly different, but similar vibes.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, and for everybody who isn't privy on this conversation, Spine is a company, just as Glenn explained. They're trying to disrupt the industry, by their words, by publishing 8,000 books in 2025. And exactly as Glenn said, if you dig into it, they're not truly generating the entire book, but they're trying to replace the proofreading, the editing process. I believe they're going with the art as well. They're trying to do generative art, and that's really what I think a lot of artists, not just authors, but any type of illustrator is really concerned about, is the generative art, because it's not, to your point, what you said earlier, it's not truly creating anything. It's stripping assets or similarities off pre-existing works to generate what it thinks is a unique area. And I guess like a super AI defenders, they could say, well, that's no different than you taking inspiration, but the difference is you have to put in the talent and the art, the work to get into that area. So if I write a book that is very similar to the Iliad, and it's just an updated version of the way I want to write it, isn't the same as me typing in to a machine, hey, give me a story like the Iliad but set in the 21st century.
Yeah, I think another important call out is, I mean, well, there's still the moral question of how they're trained, but if we just, it's a huge subject, I'm not going to ignore it, but setting aside for a moment, there is a portion of it where I think that these tools can be fun to use, but recreationally so. And I think that's an important differentiation too, like where, I've used several of these AI tools, be it like Midjourney or ChatGPT, and it's fun. Like what would Lord of the Rings be like if Frodo had a gun? Like that's kind of a fun thing, and like it comes up with a little synopsis, and it's like kind of goofy, and you laugh about it, and then that's it. But I'm not going to say write me a whole book, and then it would come up with it. I think there's another gray area that I have seen where people are now talking to ChatGPT, for example, because they have like the advanced AI voice stuff, where they're using it as a sounding board to talk through their ideas. That's a gray area, because it's like, well, is that any different than just talking to a person? If it gives you an idea, is that yours by copyright law? Because technically speaking, it's a software that's providing you information and then you're acting on it. Yeah, I think there's a ton of gray areas, and in my opinion, there's only a few black and white specific examples, but yeah, a lot of gray. And I think we as a community need to try to be kind to each other, and try to work as a society. Like, because as you say, I think we need to understand the technology as best we can, and then decide as a society, this is what we think is appropriate. And we're not going to do that in this call. It's a year-long, decade-long conversation as these technologies advance, but it's important to talk about it, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to use what you said to kind of relate it to technology when it changed when I was coming out of high school. I was in high school right when cell phones were really becoming more mainstreamed and people were getting them in their pockets. And I had a psychology teacher that explained that there's going to be a social decorum where we're going to see acceptable use of cell phones shift. So if you remember back when like the Razor was very common, people were starting to get headphones that could communicate, their Bluetooths communicating with their cell phones. You had people answering the phones at inappropriate times. So in the middle of a restaurant, they'd be walking up and down an aisle. Kids would get their phones taken away in school. But eventually, society understood that there was a social norm that needed to be established. And I think that needs to be established with AI at a couple different levels. So you mentioned that we're not going to be able to say exactly what is right, but I would like to ask you some examples just to kind of see where, as a fellow creative, that you think AI could or couldn't be used. And I'm going to start where I think I'm most guilty. And for anybody who's listening to this, we're having this discussion at the middle of January. And at this time period, because I don't know when I'll necessarily post this, there's a artist that's taking a lot of flack for accusing another artist of creating an AI image. And it came out that that image is not AI. And there's a whole fallout between these two because the AI image caused people to essentially cyberbully that artist off Twitter and a couple other accounts. And we don't want that to happen. So where I think I'm most guilty is I use a software called Pro Writing Aid. And you can say it is or isn't AI. It does have some advanced AI functions that I don't use. So it does have a generative function included in it, where if you're stuck on an area, you can ask it to generate something. I don't use that function. However, I do utilize its analysts, and I look for words that I repeat too often. And it's helped me identify words that I overuse so I can better fix my writing. In your opinion, and again, you said this earlier, everything's my opinion at this point, in your opinion. So anybody listening to this, don't burn us down. We're not witches. Glenn, is that an inappropriate use of AI in the creative space? And I won't take it personally if you feel one.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I think what you're describing sounds like, in my opinion, an acceptable use. Where you are trying to write something and a tool is identifying patterns that it would take you time to see. So it helps you in speeding up your process, helps you be more efficient. The distinction you made is that you don't let it generate sentences for you. I personally don't like that because it's basically letting it write for you. So I personally, and I'm not saying this is right, but I'm saying me personally, I don't let LLMs or large language models or AI generate content for me when I'm doing creative writing. Everything that you see is written by me. And the analogy I like to use is I'm not a professional cook in any means. And if you ask my family, they say, don't cook, please. But if I was to bake a batch of cookies, part of the enjoyment of those cookies is that there's something not quite right with them. And so I think that there's a portion of, when we're using tools to make us like perfect or whatever, there's like a part of it that's like, when you see a typo, you're like, this person's human. And it's it reminds you that they're human. So like, I don't use it personally to generate because it takes away, that I did it, that it was part of me, it's part of, my vision for whatever I'm writing. And maybe there's mistakes, but I accept it like I haven't eaten that many of my own cookies, so maybe I should ask my family if they want me to cook ever again. But yeah, I think it's tough though, because as authors, especially indie authors, we are trying to identify ways to be cost efficient because we have to do everything ourselves, especially like self-publishing, I should specify, because there are indie presses and publishers. But if we're self-publishing, we have to do so much ourselves that it's so easy to say, oh, well, I'll just AI generate a cover image and, throw some words on Canva, call it a day. That saves you, maybe $500, which it could be a lot for a lot of people. And so it's really tempting, I'll say that, to just use AI. but yeah, I hope that as a society we come to accept that, you know, like it's okay if we don't have it perfect. Um, that it's more important that it came from a human, that there's that human heart or aspect or spirit, however you want to word it, that's part of it being not perfect. So, you know, maybe I can generate in Mid-Journey something that looks like amazing, quote unquote, but it wasn't made by a human, so then it's soulless at some level. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. Kind of went tangential.
No worries. That's what we're here for. I do agree, and especially with even the corrective generative. So like it's on Pro Writing Aid, they can like highlight it yellow and say, "Hey, there's a better way to communicate what you're saying." It's dangerous just to use that, even if you're not worried about the AI side, because you have a unique voice as a writer. And the more you rely on a machine to tell you that, the more it's taking away your voice and replacing it with this generic machine voice out there. So I do think you are correct on that side as well. So I have to take it to the next level. So editing. Now, I told you what I use Pro Writing Aid for. Obviously, it's just everything else is just an amped up version of what Word already does. But I know that there is more advanced editing software out there, Bookspine claiming to be one of them. I personally don't feel that you should rely on AI to edit, because while you did mention that it can probably write a perfect manuscript without a typo, I have seen AI try and correct already written manuscripts, and it doesn't make that connection. For like dialogue is a great example. You might want to have a certain type of way that somebody speaks, and it doesn't understand that. If you
Mm-hmm.
rely on that machine, I don't think it's going to give you the result you want. So I personally just avoid AI editing. But in your opinion, do you think AI editing is crossing the line?
Mm. Yeah, I think that's a good call out because one of the things that people kind of assume if they're not, you know, keeping track of how the technology is advancing, people assume that what it generates is correct. Which, if you look into it, only recently have we been getting into like the 80 to 90% accuracy, and even with like the top models where they're spending $200, I think it's like, or it's $2,000 a month. I can't remember. It's an insane number of monies to subscribe to these top levels. Even at these top levels, they're only reaching, you know, 85, 87% accuracy. These tools hallucinate, which, if you're not familiar with the term in this context, is where the AI will try to figure it out and just spit out something. The kind of funny-ish example was the Google was trying to do summarizing, and it answered questions really badly. But technically, they were written well. Like they, you know, they had proper grammar structure, they had, you know, proper capitalization, you know, all the words were in the right place. But as a human, we can see contextually, no, eating rocks 3 times a day is probably not a good idea. And it's like, that's not natural for a bee to exist in a certain place. And so it's like, yeah, I think that's the dangerous side of, like, if you type something in, there's kind of a magic trick of like, ooh, look at this cool thing it generated. But then you also have to keep in the back of your mind, this might not actually be correct. And so, yeah, I think there's a portion of it is to remember that these tools make mistakes, and they even call it out when you use it. But to your question around editing specifically, um, I don't know how many people think about that editing is a creative job. There is a proofreading part of it, and like a, you know, maybe typesetting part of it that maybe is less creative because you're formatting stuff or checking for, you know, apostrophes where they should be and semicolons and whatnot. But like, especially when I talked about like development and editors and flow editors and people who are looking at the context of the story, I think that's where we again enter into, um, as humans, we understand the context and we can understand what the person is trying to do. and then we can speak from our own personal experience to then give our opinion. Whereas machines, they don't necessarily understand context, they don't have our human experience, and they will amalgamate a response, which, even as another example, if you take a thing and pass it through an AI, LLM, whatever, if you ask it to do something in two separate scenarios, it will almost always generate two separate things. But if you ask an editor to look at a manuscript twice, more often than not, they're probably going to come out at around the same. Maybe they identify a little bit here, a little bit there, but the spirit of what they do and how they are, recommending changes will probably be the same. And I think that's another thing to call it in the many call outs of this conversation.
Yeah, and I kind of gave a part of my answer to that question. I already said I don't feel comfortable with somebody just using AI to edit their manuscripts. I don't know how I would feel if somebody used AI to edit it and then sent it to an editor, solely because of everything you touched on, that it kind of changes a lot of the art that goes behind it, and it's trying to fit, a circle into a round hole, and you change the way that final product is going to come out with. So now we have to jump into a little bit more stylized portions of it. It's going to get harder for us now to really say where that line is for us. Outlining. How would you feel if you learned an author that you really appreciated was outlining their novels or their short stories with AI?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I guess it would depend. So, in my opinion, I think that if you have like a mess of text, like let's say you just brain dumped, you have 1,000 words in a big old paragraph, and you don't really know how to break that apart. If it took that and without changing, the wording at all it does is organize the information, I think that's fine personally. Like it's not that different than if you, select it all, put it as a point form, hit enter a bunch of times, and then reorganize it yourself. It will apply some creative application of where to place information. So there's gray in there. But if it's helping you to speed up what you're going to do anyways, I don't personally see an issue with that. The harder part is where it's making things for you. So let's say you have bits of an outline, or you have a synopsis, and then you say make an outline for me, and it generates something for you along the lines of what you started with. I think that's when we get into the, let's say, less gray to more darker areas of use personally, because then it's making it for you. It's making decisions and creative decisions for you. And then at that point, the question is, did you come up with the story, or did it? And you wrote it for it, which, I mean, maybe when AI, this is going to open a can of worms, but maybe when AI achieves, AGI and ASI have intelligence that's equivalent to humans, then maybe we could have them give us an outline and we'd write a story, and we're ghostwriters for AI. And that's a whole other tangent of, man, if I had the time, I'd write a whole book or book series just on what would happen in a society where AI achieves, artificial general intelligence. But that's a whole talk in itself.
We got to do it now before somebody needs to do it. Because don't worry, I'm going to publish this podcast later, so somebody else can't steal your idea. So my take on outlining: if you asked AI just to generate a template, I don't really care, because that's no different than like if you just took somebody's template offline that they offered for free. But if you asked it to generate it based off any information, I wouldn't do that. And I guess you can say that's my line in the sand for it. But it's not because of what it's adding to it. My concern would be teaching the AI, and you're giving away your information at that point. I guess, it's getting into that line of, when are we teaching AI? And I know you said you didn't want to get into that conversation, so we won't dive too deep into it. But I wouldn't like the idea that I have a general concept I'm proud of, and I give it to the machine, and that machine puts it in a cloud. So a lot of people that are listening to this, they may know I work in information protection security for a large healthcare organization, and healthcare fights the how they want to handle AI all the time. And a big part of it is exactly what I just said, is that we like to say it's in the cloud, and my IT friends will say they all have that joke that there is no cloud, it's just somebody else's server, which is exactly what it is. And AI, any type of learning AI, is taking that information and storing it someplace else. And then you have to ask, what is that information being used for? Because it's sitting there, and it's not just sitting there taking up space because that's money. And as we are learning with all these large companies, what they're doing is they're data scraping that information that's coming in, which is why a lot of hospitals, while the patients may use certain things, you'll see that they don't use things like Alexa or Google Homes inside their offices, because it's listening to you and it's scraping all that data when it goes into those clouds. Now Google's going to sue me because I said that, and it's probably a misrepresentation. But we'll wait for that to happen. So, all right. So that's where my line stands. So I think you can probably figure out where my answer is going to be on the next couple ones. So would you be upset with somebody using AI as a ghostwriter then? And if you are, aren't, what's the dividing line between somebody who just uses a ghostwriter?
Yeah, I mean, I guess if you own that you didn't make it, and so I guess it wouldn't be a ghostwriter at that point. If you said, and I've said this to people, like I made a goofy synopsis with Frodo and a handgun, and I sent that to somebody, and I said, ChatGPT made this. I don't have an issue with that personally, because I'm identifying I had an interesting idea, I gave it to something else, and it made a thing out of it. So while it's cool and fun, I didn't make it. I had this spark that created the thing, but it's not mine. It's not my writing. It's not my voice. There's creative choices it made that I didn't, but I can still enjoy it. I wouldn't sell it personally, because if you were making money off of what someone else made, you would have to have some kind of agreement there, which I guess ghostwriters do. So like, you pay a writer to write for you, and then it would be published as you. I'll say for transparency, I don't have a ton of experience with ghostwriters personally. Being a writer, I just choose to write myself. But there are people who, let's say, for example, politicians or famous actors that maybe need a little bit of help with the writing process, either completely or, in part. So with ghostwriting in general, I think that's totally fine. With using AI to do it for you, I think we're still back in that question of, did you write it and can you own it? And if you make money off of it, like, should that go to you or should it go to ChatGPT? And touching back on your previous comment, I do think it's an important topic to talk about the training of data. I don't know if people really think about that part too much. I think people are becoming more aware of it. And I mean, to be honest, I don't know if there's a lot we can do about it other than having awareness. And, if you're in the States, you can, call your senator, call your representatives. I guess you can do that too in Canada, but I don't know. It seems like a thing that Americans say is, oh, call your senator, call your congressman. I don't hear that in Canada as much. It's like, sure, they exist, but I don't know if anyone's ever said, oh, go call them. Kind of a funny aside there. But yeah, anyway, back to that point of, I think it's an important question to talk about the training of the data, because I know certain people who have left X, for example, because X changed their policy to train on people's data. So if you post on X, it will more than likely train its AI model based on what you're posting to X. And Instagram is doing the same thing. They are taking your images and they will train its AI model, which is going to generate images based on stuff that you made. I know Adobe got in big trouble with it and everybody freaked out, rightfully so, I think, because they changed it and some of their legal wording was really kind of messed up. But yeah, I think it's an important thing for people to think about, of like, we type things into the internet and just kind of goes into somewhere. That somewhere exists, and then a company will probably make money off of it. So then thinking about, what information are you sending to the internet? Do you care about what it's being used for? Are there certain tools that we shouldn't use as a society, and say, hey, I don't accept that Facebook is doing this. I'm not going to share this kind of content with them. Yeah, I think those are interesting questions.
Yeah, and for anybody who's listening to this, with my colleagues on my professional side, we always say that if you ever hear that an app is free, the app isn't free, you're the currency. So just be aware of that, especially if you're downloading anything on your cell phone. You're like, oh, it's a free app. No, you're the currency. All your private information is the currency, and yeah, that's absolutely true. But that's a conversation I think that you and I would probably go down a rabbit hole and spend all day talking about. So I'll say, because I didn't give my answer to the original line of question, is I feel very unusual about ghostwriters, and this is not an insult to anybody out there who's listening to this that might be a ghostwriter or might use ghostwriters. And I start with that before I get into the AI side of it, because I understand, exactly to your point, people who aren't writers, that I feel like that's what the intended use of ghostwriters are. And if I found out that a brand new author paid a ghostwriter, I probably wouldn't care either. But my problem came out, and I don't even know why it's really a problem. I haven't dissected my own feeling about this yet. But there's a very famous author that I recently learned. It's just a corporate set of ghostwriters now that write under his name. And that really just made me say, I don't want to read any of his books now, because it's not him writing it. It's these 20 or 30 people that this company hires, and it's not truly him. I don't want to say the name because I think a lot of people probably know who it is. It came out as a pretty major, I don't want to say scandal, but that's the best word that fits this, mid last year. And I was just like, I'm not going to read his books because it's not him writing it. I'd rather read these stories from these talented individuals that are doing it on his behalf. Again, that's not to insult anybody out there who's a ghostwriter, or if you end up using a ghostwriter. When you're asking AI to be your ghostwriter, there's a couple portions to this. The first side is, in the current state, I don't think AI is to that level where we can say that it's passable. And we see this in image generation. You'll get hands with 6-7 fingers on it. You'll get firearms that don't follow basic laws of mechanics and weird things like that. And it is getting better. And, if we follow the laws of technology in a decade, it's probably going to be indistinguishable from anything a person can do. But do we want the machine to do that is the next question. And my answer is no. Like if I was going to give AI a job, I want AI to control a robot and do the dishes for me, not write my book. To help me out in the other parts of my life, so I have more time for art and less time spent on the menial things. I want to spend more time with my kid, not more time doing laundry and dishes. So
yeah.
So I'd say no to that. And I'm also coming from a biased side because, like I said, there's something in me that's bothered by ghostwriting in general. I've given you my two sides of it. I'm fine with people who aren't writers using it, and probably somebody who comes out there and wants to just be a brand and they don't really truly want to be a writer. But that's why write at that point? Choose any other of the cool arts out there to be a part of. So that's my side of it. Somebody's probably going to send me a missile and tell me how terrible of a human being I am, and I'm a hack, and I need to be bullied off Twitter. It'll happen.
I mean, something that might help save you is I think the thing that we've repeated multiple times is these are our opinions. How people are choosing to use these tools, how people write, it's up to the individual. I think there are some societal things that we can talk about, and maybe as a society we can agree these things are good, these things are not as good. But I mean, yeah, it's like it's personal preference to some degree, and it's also a question of, like, as a reader, what are you looking to get out of reading a book? Like, if you, like in your example, you care about learning about a certain writer and what their, their image of a world looks like in their writing experience. And other people, it might just be, they just want to hear a cool story. And I think that's kind of the category that tends to not care as much about like the GPT created stories. I think there is a room for people. I read a book recently. I don't know, and I mean, maybe he did write it, maybe he didn't. It was a book by Simu Liu, a Canadian actor, and I really enjoyed it. Part of me wondered how much he wrote, and it's not it's not shade at him personally. Maybe he's a writer, maybe he's not. But I don't think it would really bother me if he had someone help him, because the thing that I cared about was learning about his story, and his story is amazing. By the way, if you want to read his book, I recommend it. Bring a tissue box because you're probably going to cry. But yeah, I appreciated learning about his story. So the thing that I wanted to get out of it was he's a cool Canadian actor. I've seen him in a number of things. I want to learn more about him and how he grew up in his story. So if he wrote it, cool. If he didn't, also cool. His profession is acting. So if he isn't also a professional writer, that's fine. At the end of the day, I got to read a cool book. He got to tell his story. Everybody wins in that scenario. But, if he went out and used a ChatGPT to do it, I don't know, then it becomes maybe not so much.
I get that. And, I talked about this with one of my other guests, and I'm going to have a segment dedicated just to the literary analysis of The Author is Dead, which you can listen to it. I absolutely hate that analysis technique solely because there is a right way and a wrong way that can be looked at for certain works. And I use Lord of the Rings as the example that Lord of the Rings would not exist the way it did had he not been a veteran of World War One. It's that entire story. I get it. It's medieval fantasy. It's high fantasy, but World War One shaped a lot of the way he told that story. And he's admitted this in interviews. And so you can go out there. So when I read takes on certain characters that completely negate that, or they try to bring a modern view to it, I'm like, I don't know if you guys understand, like, you can't just ignore exactly what the author intended to bring in there, which is why, I go back to, I hate when people brush off analysis and say the author is dead. This analysis is correct, because there are times when it's not the right way to look at a piece of work. And where I'm going with that, when in relation to AI, is that AI doesn't have the human experience to it. So if you want to just read a cool story, that's the equivalent of people who just want a summer fun action movie, right? There are tons of movies that come out. They're fine movies, but they don't stick with us. We see them in summer. They do fine, but it kind of just ends there. But then we have movies that become classics and they stick with us and they become timeless. And I feel like that's a different type of art. And people who really care about movies, they appreciate a different level of art as well. And I think it comes down to that human factor, right? No shade at Transformers. It's a very simple movie. I only use Transformers because it's one of those movies that's kind of like dying down. I didn't want to say Marvel because it's still going. They were fine action movies. They did their thing. They have their fans out there, but it's not the same as Casablanca that had a point to make, and that there's people who really pick apart that movie, things of that nature. But do we want a machine to start putting out action movies? And if we do, are we just going to value that over anything that you and I can create? And at that point, like, what are we going to do? Are we just going to do laundry and dishes all day, and machines are going to do all of our art for us? And I think a lot of people will start needing to have that conversation, even if they're only casual, consumers at some point. They need to say, well, do I want a machine doing this for me just so I can have my 5 minutes of dopamine? Or do I want a human that can relate to me at some level do it? I feel like that got way too emotional there at the end.
It's all good. Yeah, I'm just thinking. Yeah, I think it's an interesting point because, like, The like, so this is us talking about our personal experience as, as indie writers and self-publishing writers. There is the other side of the question, which you touched on, which is corporations. They are going to make choices that we wouldn't make because their priorities are different. Like my priority is, as a writer, I want to write the best story I can. I want to tell a story that I think is compelling. I want to, have a message of positivity or hope or help people process certain, traumas or emotions. That's me. But as a corporation, if you really break it down, at the end of the day, it's money. Most corporations are bent around that question of how can they make more money and faster and easier. So I think we're going to see movies that are going to be made by AI to some degree. And we already have seen it. There's some subtle ones like I'm not 100% sure because I haven't looked to verify, but one of the Marvel TV shows had an intro that I could swear like that intro looked like it was made by AI. And I don't know if it was just an artistic choice, but it certainly felt like that they used some model to do it as like a testing ground to see what people thought. Most people didn't like it, which surprise. But yeah, I think we're going to see more of it. We're going to see industries like movies, like books, art. Music is another example where they're like, you know what, we want to make money. How's the fastest way do we do it? We just make more things. But they're going to miss the heart. And I hope that people as a society don't accept that. Yeah, I don't know. It's going to be weird. Like, for example, there's that new-ish at this point tool that you can generate music with, and it's so odd because it, technically speaking, does make music. It sounds pretty good for the tools that are out there, but it's just it's such an odd experience because it's like there's no human in this. This is all just a machine, like trying to make something up that's based on the things that you input. Yeah, I don't know. It's a weird time to be alive in some ways. Cool and also weird.
Yeah, honestly, I think the first fight in the AI universe is going to have to be video and imaging. And somebody's going to have to make the argument that too much of an image is a copyright infringement. And that's going to change the conversation, in my opinion. If there's going to be a fight, it's going to be there. I feel like authors, there's just already such a flooded market of literature out there that it's going to be very hard for us to try and say that our data was scraped to make a certain story. So I think it starts with imaging and video artists saying, hey, my work has been plagiarized with X, Y, and Z, and have that lawsuit. Because right now, to your point, a company is always profit motivated, and Amazon is okay with you publishing with AI products as long as you check a box when you go to publish that says this was made with AI, and they go through with it. And I think that's Amazon's polite way of testing the waters to see if people have the stomach to accept AI. And I don't think what they realize is in the writing community, like I said, it's a very saturated market. You can go into Amazon and type in fantasy books and have enough lists that you won't get to it by the end of the day trying to click through it. So if you're adding AI to it, you're not really testing if people are accepting of the methodology. You're just adding another drop to an ocean. But if you start having people say, this is just utter garbage and I'm not going to buy this, then we can start having a conversation. We'll teach corporations that way not to allow AI. But I think if you wanted to get a law that says you can't use AI for certain human type productions, it's going to have to be our visual medias that lead that charge. I don't think authors have that ability, just because you're going to have to really find one that is scraped off people you can recognize.
Yeah, that's tough, eh? And yeah, I think there's already things that are in use in play that are using some form of AI. And the better it gets, like even just today, like this is 2025, even today, there's art, quote unquote, that can be generated, or even videos that can be generated that you have to really look hard to see if it's not real. And then you won't know, like definitively you can't know now. Like some of the, I think Midjourney is probably one of the more sophisticated ones, but there's enough tools out there where you can generate an image and you'll have to pause and think, is that real? Which is it's kind of a sad side of the story, really, in my opinion, because for example, with the indie artist showcase, I have to look at art and I have to ask the question, is this AI made? And sometimes I don't know. And that I have to even ask that question, it kind of makes me sad, because it's like maybe they did make it. It just unfortunately happens to look like AI. And I know that there's a few examples I've heard of where artists didn't use AI, but they got called out for it. And it just happened to be because, their lighting style just seems AI-ish. And yeah, it's a bummer, because it's like people spent time making something. This is how they express their artistic creative abilities, and it's just kind of getting lumped into it, which is why I've been pushing out into these supporting indie spaces of, you know, we have stories that we think are important. We want to share them. I've read, several indie books over the last year, and I'll be reading more this year. And like, I've had a really good time reading these books and talking with these artists and seeing what they're creating. And I want more people to see that, more people to experience that, and to not have to wonder, was this AI made? And so I think that's an important reason of why I started Indie Release Radar, why I'm doing the Indie, artist showcase and other projects I have in the pipeline. But yeah, I guess we'll see what society does, and hopefully we're able to pick up on some of these things quicker than the technology advances. But I don't know, it's going to be an interesting next few years.
Yeah, and just because you made me think of this, something else other people need to be aware of is that there want to be artists that scam traditional artists. So I ran into this with my last book, where I was looking for an artist to create a cover design, and they had great portfolios, and they had I think they had 55 reviews, and I was using Fiverr, which, I mean, you can go up and down whether or not you like them. I enjoy Fiverr. I've had some great relationships on there. So I trusted this one cover designer, and I went forward with them, and the product that came back was very clearly AI generated. Now, I was fortunate that it was $150. It wasn't going to sink me completely out of the project that could destroy some people. And I had to go back and forth, and Fiverr finally agreed with me that they weren't upfront with their original intention with me, and I got a refund out of it. So I saved that. But there are people out there that would have completely halted their progress for a couple months, getting that product, or they would have to go forward with the AI generated image, because that's all they can produce, in that time period. So there are also the scam artists. And leading into that, just because I have to plug this, being on the security side, AI is getting so well that they're starting to come out with deep fakes, which is you can take somebody's likeness. So we can take Glenn here and create a video of him saying how much he loves AI and he thinks it's artist. And you joke about it, but it's a thing. It truly is. And they target primarily politicians. But if you want to see it, you can go out there and type in deep fake Tom Cruise. And there's one that looks like Tom Cruise saying some unhinged things, which granted it's Tom Cruise, so it's probably a little bit more believable. But it's not him. It's an AI program that made a video with his likeness and his voice and generated it. And we've seen more of it, especially if you're in the United States after the last election. There's some just unhinged videos from both sides, and it's not true. None of them are real. But that's going to be a problem all in of itself, right? Because then it's like, hey, I can generate a video of you robbing a liquor store and say that you did it. And now the burden of proof is on me, right?
Yeah.
So So, Glenn, we are getting close to the end of the hour here. So, if you don't mind, go ahead and tell my audience where they can find your information. I, of course, will include all the links at the bottom when this is posted. But just so if they're listening to this and they're driving down the road, where can we find your information?
Sure. Yeah. So I'd say probably the best place is my website, which is creativewritingwizard.com. I put all my social links there and most of my information, the resources I share are there. If you want to find me on socials, you can use my name, which is at Glen Weatherhead, which is one N for Glen. Yeah, I think those are probably the two best places at the moment. There are going to be other spaces that I'm pushing out into in this year and beyond, but those are probably the most established that you can find me there. And happy to talk in threads and Instagram, X, Blue Sky, TikTok, RIP. It's going the way of the dodo bird, but I am technically on there if it gets last minute save. Yeah, like hit me up if you are upset by anything I say. Feel free to let me know privately, personally. I think that's a good way to talk out your beef. But if you really want to, you can at me on socials and I'll have that conversation. Yeah, I think these are important subjects to talk about.
Well, Glenn, again, I really appreciate your time. Anybody, if you do have issues with anything I said or Glenn said, just keep it social, because Glenn's a good dude and he's doing a lot of good things for a lot of cool authors out there. So, everybody out there, again, this is Birds with Words. I'm your host, Sean Fitzgerald. If I don't talk to you anytime soon, stay frosty.